So in regards of PHP, whenever you need to approach a complex problem and you are just prototyping and you need to store heterogeneous data, what do you go for? You go for an array, right? Like, even if you don't want to, you don't have any other options as far as you know anyways. So that being said, what are arrays really in PHP? And this is an actual question. So how many of you are familiar with PHP array internals in PHP? Yeah, no one looks at the PHP source code, right? Like, that's horrible. No one would do that. So arrays first appeared in PHP 4. Up until that point, it was non-existent. Yeah, surprisingly enough, PHP 3's source code is downloadable and arrays are not in there. That's it. So it's a newcomer. Technically, it's not an array, believe it or not. It's literally a hash map / bucket combo, and we will talk about that later, but it's definitely not an array. It has undergone a serious amount of optimizations in PHP 7, and its performance has increased significantly, but unfortunately, it's not good enough yet. And it works really well if you don't know what the hell you are doing or what you want to use it for. If you are just prototyping, just go for an array. As soon as you figure out what are you doing with that data, just leave the array behind, because it's just not going to fly. In order to demonstrate that, because I'm just talking, right? And I can say whatever the hell I want. But in order to demonstrate how arrays work or don't work, let me show you a bit of an example. Please give me an estimation on how much time does it take for PHP to insert 130,000 values into an array, which are just numbers. Couple of milliseconds, maybe. Couple of milliseconds, maybe, right? Like nothing significant. Yeah, not even that. So literally 0.002 seconds. And that's what you expect from an array, right? It's like 100,000 values, like integers. Nothing should catch it. Now let me show you something. This is the same code, just using different array keys. No, the keys are still numeric. Both the keys and the values are numeric. This is not an associative array. I am just using different array keys. Yeah, 20 seconds, right? It's a bit horrendous. I am more than happy to show you the code for that, because I'm pretty sure that you are curious about it. So the good code is literally nothing. Font size. Let me increase that. Oh, come on. There you go. Let's set it to 36. So as you can see, it does nothing. This is the one that finished lightning fastly, like lightning quickly. Literally, we are just using the generated key itself, and we are just inserting zeros, like nothing special. And we are just using serialized keys, starting from 0, going up to 130,000. Now, what happens when we are doing it badly is that we are manually causing key collisions, which means that PHP's internals, as we will discuss, are extremely vulnerable to key collision, which shouldn't happen in an array because you can't have a key collision in an array, but in PHP you can. As Matthew pointed it out in the previous discussion, PHP is full of weird stuff. Arrays are one of them. So let's go back to the presentation so you will understand in a split second why is PHP so bad in this regard. So PHP's arrays are implemented with a two-step architecture. The very first step is that it's a hash map. Very first thing, whenever you want to put any kind of value, key value pair into an array, a hash will be generated from the key. This is how you can have an associative array, because a hash is generated. This is how you can have a numerically keyed array, because a hash is generated. This is why you can have an object as a key of an array, because a hash is generated from the serialized object. Yeah. That being said, unfortunately, when you are generating hash, and we all know that, key collisions can and will occur, especially the more values you have. So technically what PHP does is that it implements a secondary solution for key collision, and that's a special hybrid of a double linked list, which is traversable via pointers. This is how it looks like. When you have any kind of key, a hash is generated, but because there can be hash collisions, there is a bucket of possible values for that hash. So literally what happens is that when you start causing hash collisions, then this linked list will become very long. And then extending this list will become very costly. This is why it was 20 seconds in the second example. Does it make sense? For me, it does not, because it shouldn't be implemented this way. But that's all right. So that being said, the cost itself makes sense, obviously, but it's not something that you would want to use in a production environment in any way, right? So what do we know about arrays so far? It's used for many things, like you can implement a lot of stuff in arrays, that's fine. It's optimized for everything, or try to be optimized for everything, so it's optimized for nothing on the flip side. It's extremely vulnerable to key collisions, and you can artificially cause that to happen. And hashing can be really costly in case of large data sets. That's typo error, sorry. So in that regard, if you are using huge strings for keys and you populate it with a lot of values, then there will be a problem. So that being said, there are some alternatives. In regards of alternatives, there is one library called SPL, which is a standard PHP library. Probably everyone heard about SPL. If not, then because of the array iterators and the array iterator. But that being said, today, what we will talk about are the actual data structures in it. So if you do some quick Googling on the PHP documentation, then you will see that in SPL, there are some specialized data structures that you can use for specific purposes. So you can implement, for example, a queue or a stack or a double linked list or a map or anything like that in order to make your life slightly more easy. But they only work if you know what you are doing. Like, they are not generic purpose at all, as they shouldn't be. SPL was awesome up until PHP 7. Even after PHP 7, some of the special cases, SPL is still superior, but PHP 7's array performances got much better. Unfortunately, when you take a look at the source code, you will have the same impression as when you would be looking at the PHP source code. It's not a good implementation whatsoever. And on the good side, though, SPL is compiled into PHP since 5.0. So that being said, you don't need to do any extra steps in order to get these little boys up and running on your machine and to start using these classes, simply because it's freely available and it's already there in all the PHP versions you have. That being said, SPL is perfect, but in some regards, but unfortunately, it still doesn't quite cut it. So some people got fed up with that and got fed up with arrays and started implementing a new PHP extension roughly 2 years ago. And it's called ext-ds, which is the data structures extension. So ext-ds itself is an extension that can be installed via pickle, if you want to. It's just pickle install the ext-ds and you are good to go. It's compatible with all the available PHP versions right now, or the supported ones at least. And it supports a given set of data structures. As such, it supports vectors. Vector is literally the correspondent of an array. So you can have associative keys in it, you can have object keys in it, and so on and so forth. And as we will saw on the benchmarks, it's much faster than PHP array. You can have a deck, you can have a map. A map is literally a unique array, as such, in ext-ds, where if you insert a new value for the same key, then the later insertion will take place without any issues. You can have pairs, set stacks, and so on and so forth. And you can implement queues as well, which operate like a proper queue. not like your hacky solution in arrays, right? So that being said, it has a significant performance gain even over PHP 7, which is pretty good. It's considered to have a good quality implementation, but given the fact that it's an extremely young extension compared to all the other PHP extensions, there are still shortcomings and there are still open issues in GitHub. It has a polyfill library, which is really important because technically what you can do is that you can pull in its polyfill library into your code. So if you accidentally deploy your code onto a server or a container where ext-ds is not available or you can't install it for any reason, then it will just fall back to the PHP package. While if it's installed, the polyfill will be ignored and it will use the native implementation of the extension. So literally you can't really lose by having the polyfill in. And as I said, it needs to be installed via pickle. So that being said, again, I am talking about SPL and ext-ds, but let's see some benchmarks, right? The same way as we did before. I won't run code because running the benchmarks in real time takes some time and I don't want to bore you and everyone's already sleepy anyways because of the pizza. So in that regard, please allow me to show you some comparisons and I will just show you the more important ones in this regard. So one is, for example, an unshift statistics. So when you are starting to reduce an array size as such. So as you are going with the unshifting, the more, interestingly enough, it's not linear, even in PHP arrays. As you start unshifting values, unshifting more and more values will take exponentially more time over time. But that being said, the blue line, that's small, so I will tell you which color is which. Blue is PHP array. The y-axis is time needed. The x-axis is elements removed. So the more elements you remove, obviously more time will pass, but it will pass exponentially. The red line is the deck. This is kind of like a double linked list-ish optimized implementation. And then the yellow line is the vector. And the SPL implementation of double linked list due to its special structure will be superior to everything in this regard. So if you are doing any kind of operation where you are unshifting a serious amount of stuff from an array because you, for example, want to shrink it to 0 and you don't want to use array walk because that doesn't cut it, then go for the SPL or go for vector. This is the time taken. Now, interestingly enough, memory taken shows us a little bit different picture. So if you are memory short in this regard, then don't use PHP arrays. What a surprise. Go for vector instead, which is the yellow one, because that will spare you a lot of memory. For example, if you are doing Lambda or doing a Fargate container, it can help you quite a lot. In this regard, interestingly enough, memory. You might be surprised to hear, but if you are doing popping from an array, PHP doesn't do any kind of garbage collection, irrespective of how many values do you pop. PHP just simply won't clean up, which is pretty crap, right? So that being said, you don't see a yellow line because the memory usage of vector and deck from the DS library is exactly the same. Both, literally all the structures that you see in ext-ds has a common ground in memory management, namely that if any kind of structures size shrinks to 50%, garbage collection happens. That's the explanation of this graph. That garbage collection happens as soon as it halves, right? While in SPL, the common approach was that it needs to do an immediate cleanup. That's why you see that line going down linearly. Now, that being said, there are pros and cons to both, obviously. SPL's con is that you will see a serious amount of CPU time spent on paging, memory, for example, because it's cleaning up all the time. Sometimes you will cut the array in half, sometimes you won't. Again, it's really up to you. But that being said, again, it depends on what your use case is. You will just have to go with what you want to do. In regards of, yeah, that's another cleanup. Let's see if there is anything interesting in these benchmarks. Yeah, What a surprise, shifting. So when you are populating an array, right? Sorry, unshifting. Sorry about that. Unshifting. When you are populating an array, we discussed that when you put values in, then PHP will become slower and slower. When you are unshifting, interestingly enough, it's not performing any better either. So it's not just when you are putting values in, when you are getting values out, it won't work fine either. It just eats up too much time and too much memory. No, so that's because of the hash key collision. So it's not about, it does not recalculate hashes at all. But the problem is that if there is already a hash conflict, then literally what it needs to do is that it needs to get a value out and it needs to reorganize the pointers so that the list is continuous. And that's what takes time. That's what takes time. And what takes time in case of doubly linked list is exactly the same, plus the garbage collection. Because, sorry, this is memory usage, but the time is pretty much the same. Doubly linked list is underneath the blue one. So you just don't gain anything with that. So I think that these actually speak for themselves. By the way, the benchmark test suite is provided by the ext-ds developers, and it's freely available to be downloaded. These tests were running on a PHP 7.3 container, so like the latest and newest. There are plenty of benchmarks in there, but I really don't want to bore everyone with that. So just going back to the presentation. There you go. Sorry. Just a second. Just wrong click. Yeah, so ext-ds, yep. We all know this. The comparison charts, and yeah, just a brief summary about what I've talked about today. As we discussed, arrays are optimized for everything, so nothing really. There are two alternatives. Again, no one says that you have to use ext-ds. You are free to use SPL, no problem. Sometimes, as you will see, if you run the benchmark suite yourself and test it out, you will see that under specific circumstances, SPL works better. Not in case of memory management and CPU time, not all the time, but sometimes. So it may be better for you. But first and foremost, you need to know what you are doing. Because if you don't, then you will end up with a 20-second running time for an array. Easy. Easy. Any questions? Yep.
Okay, so let's say, because I've definitely had some examples of where I'm doing big files, maybe like, big arrays, maybe from files or from a database or something like that. Is there a way to, say, populate these objects directly from like PDO if you're querying a database, or like, so say for example, like, or you're reading like a massive, huge like CSV file with like 100,000 records in it or something, for hypothetically, is there a way? What would be your tip? Because generally you like pull in an array for each and then add it to that object or something. How, like, maybe what's like a use case of where you could, or a shortcut to get straight to those objects rather than dealing with arrays at all?
There is, although it's not pretty. In regards of SPL, it's literally the standard. You just iterate through your result set, and that's pretty much it. In regards of ext-ds, each and every data structure in ext-ds has a push function, and the push function itself can accept multiple values. It's expanding the parameters. Theoretically, nothing, if there is any way that you can get the data out of your favorite ORM in a way that you can feed it into that push function, then you are good. And then you don't need to put it into an array. Again, it depends on the ORM implementation, if it's capable of it or not. That's the best I can think of right now. But the question is really good. Yep.
With ext-ds map, do you guys use like internal PHP hash function, or like default PHP Like if I want to provide my own hash function, that's probably a better question. How do I do it? Like for an object, you know, if I go with an, say if I want to index my map with an object, can I provide my own my own hash function?
Technically, yeah. So technically how it looks like is that you can, if the data structure is for that, you can literally provide, like there is a function which is called add, I think, where you can provide the key as well as the value. So if you pre-calculate your hash before insertion, sure you can do it. My only question is why? So how it would look like is that you have a, yeah, if that's the question, then how it looks like is that your object has like, let's say a get key function that gives you back the key. So you can literally, what you do is that you do a vector arrow insert or add, and the first parameter would be $object arrow get key, and the second parameter is the $object. So in regards of PHP, the reason why getHash works in Java is that getHash has a history in Java, and you have to fulfill prerequisites. And if that prerequisites are fulfilled, then the map will use getHash. PHP doesn't work like that. PHP on language level doesn't have these kind of conventions. You have to cater for them manually. That's it. That's it. But I get the point. Any other questions? Awesome. In that case, thank you very much. Yeah, that's it. Thank you very much. Much appreciated.